Hi, this is Board Gems, a video series in which I introduce to you an older board game gem. Don't just immediately go out and buy a used copy, though. Hear what I have to say about it and decide for yourself if seeking out this older game is a good idea for you and your playtastes. In this video, I'm covering... Okay, so there's no definitive way of pronouncing this. It is a combination of the sort of the Greek prefix geo, as in like land, and chaos. So you could pronounce it Geos, or Geos, or Gheos, or Gheos. The designer is René Wiersma, and as he's Dutch, he would probably pronounce it, now I don't speak Dutch, but I think it would be pronounced something like Gheos. That's how I'm going to try to pronounce it. Published in 2006 by Z-Man Games, and according to Zev Schlesinger, the owner of Z-Man Games at the time, the founder, it sold pretty well. I would guess, while it did sell well, it was probably a very large initial print run. This game didn't have any partners, like it's common when a game is published for a certain market, like a company is making, let's say an American company is making a game and they're just making the best game they can, but of course they're focused on the English-speaking market, say. It's very common to work with companies in other countries to produce localized versions. And if you can make the components kind of generic without much language on them, then you can order a bigger initial print run of all the basic components, and it's cheaper for everybody. Because this game didn't have any partners, I'm guessing in order to get price breaks, Z-Man would have placed a very large initial order. And apparently it sold well, but not enough to justify a reprint. It's for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, and takes 45 to 60 minutes to play. All very fair. This game is probably going to mislead people when they see it. When they see it and they see the grasslands and the water and the pieces on there, and it's going to give off a Carcassonne vibe. And this game is much more cutthroat, much more warlike, more attacky than Carcassonne. I'll show you how it plays, then I'll talk about some of the aspects that may still make it a gem today. To set up the game, find the starting tile. It has a star on the front. It looks the same on the back though, so when you're storing the game you probably want to keep this separate. Place that in the middle of the table between the players. Shuffle up the remaining tiles, mix them all up, and give each player 2. Most of the tiles look like this sort of thing with land and water, but several of them are epoch tiles. If anybody draws an epoch tile at the beginning for their starting hand of 2, shuffle them back into the piles and draw again until each player has 2 regular tiles. Put the scoring tokens within reach of all players, as well as these civilization markers. Each color represents a civilization. This marker is placed on a continent where that civilization lives. Each continent can only have 1 civilization. These cubes are considered followers, and you, the player, will be collecting followers. You can think of yourself as a deity, I suppose, worshipped, but you can think of them as like stocks. What is a continent? You'll see the tiles have various combinations of larger land masses, as well as little edges of a land mass, which you can call, I suppose, shores. 2 small land masses, 2 shores, put next to each other is an island. And an island is not big enough to support a civilization. These land masses, these larger land masses, are large enough to support a civilization. And as soon as you have 2 tiles together, at least one of which is a large land mass like this, you have the beginnings of a continent. And each continent can have, at most, 1 civilization. You'll notice the tiles have various symbols. This is the strength of the civilization that occupies that continent in 3 different ways. food sources, army strength, war strength, and wealth in the form of cups. Some tiles also have temples, and the temple will show one of these three symbols, and a player who plays a temple will be able to score for that symbol attached to that continent that the temple is placed on. But I'll explain all that shortly. These are scoring tokens. Each player has 3 to start. So each player has a hand of 2 tiles. The goal of the game is to score the most points by the time the game ends. The game ends either when all players have used up their scoring tokens, or a certain number of epoch tiles have been drawn. There's 8 mixed up, and the game will end when 6, 7, or 8 are revealed based on number of players. There's 3 ways of scoring points in the game. At the end of your turn, you can spend one of your 3 scoring tokens to score cups. This wealth symbol. The civilization will be worth a number of points based on the number of symbols of this type in that continent. That's how wealthy the civilization is. And players will score that many points for each follower of that civilization that they have. At random times, epoch tiles will be drawn, and then you're scoring civilizations that occupy continents that have these pyramids. The civilization will score a number of points for each pyramid that's on their continent. And again, players will score that many points for each follower they have of that civilization. And finally, as soon as you play a temple to a landmass, you are going to score 1 point for each one of the matching symbols that's connected to that landmass. Nothing to do with the civilizations. That's just immediately scoring the symbols. On your turn, you play a tile, then you may take a follower of any civilization that's already in play, or start a new civilization. Then you may optionally play a scoring token, and then finally, at the end of your turn, you will take a tile from the pile so that you have a hand of 2 tiles again. But if you draw an epoch tile, those never go into your hand. Instead, you reveal them, put them off to the side, everybody scores for pyramids, and then the player will draw another tile to go into their hand. And if that's an epoch tile, then you're going to score again. You're going to keep these set to the side so you can see how many epoch tiles have been drawn, because again, that's an end game condition. So on your turn, you take one of your 2 tiles you have in your hand and play it to the board. You can either add it to the edge. Tiles always match. You'll see all the tile edges are the same. They're mostly green and they're just blue on the corners. So you can add a tile to the existing play area on the edge, or you can play a tile and replace an existing one. And that can cause civilizations to come into contact with each other or to move around, and we'll talk about wars and migration shortly. If the tile is surrounded, then sometimes it's easier to just put the tile on top to cover it, but you're supposed to replace it. And the replaced tile goes out of the game. After you add a tile, either by replacing one or just adding a new one, you may take a follower or start a new civilization. By taking a follower, there are 5 followers of every color. There are 6 colors. You may take 1 follower of any civilization that is present on the map. There are no civilizations present on the map. The other option is to start a civilization. And to start a civilization, you need a continent. Right now, this is the only continent in play. Pick any of the discs that are not in play, place it on the landmass, and you get for free a number of followers equal to the number of wheat symbols on that landmass. So you'll see there's 2, so this player would then get 2 free followers, which they place in front of them. Afterwards, they may play a scoring token, of which they have 3, and then they will draw a tile. So they have a hand of 2 again, and their turn is over. Instead of starting a new civilization, instead you can take a follower of any civilization on the board, in which case there's just one, red. But if a player wants, instead of starting a new civilization, they can simply take a cube of one already present. If a player adds a temple to a landmass, they immediately score 1 point for each of the matching symbols that are in that landmass. So a player playing this tile here would score 2 points. Playing it here would score 1 point. Playing it here would score none. Instead of adding a tile to the edge of the board, you can replace a tile. Take a tile out and replace it. You cannot do that with any tile that has a pyramid. Each continent can hold at most one civilization, and one civilization can only occupy at most one continent. By replacing tiles, you can mess with that a bit. So right now, red and yellow are on 2 different continents. But by replacing a tile, they can merge. The tile replaced goes out of the game. And then you evaluate. This we cannot abide. There are 2 civilizations on the same continent. The result is war. When there's war, ignore any symbols that are on the new tile just played, but look at the existing parts of the continent that, in this case, red and yellow occupy, and count the number of swords. The red civilization has 1 sword, the yellow civilization has none. Therefore, when this is played, red and yellow will fight a war and red will win. In the case of a tie, the player whose turn it is chooses which civilization wins. In this case, red wins. The yellow civilization is wiped out. It's removed from the game, and importantly, any followers that any player has of the civilization just wiped out are also wiped out. You have 3 followers in yellow? Too bad. They're all gone. Yellow is now wiped off the map. Of course, later on, new continents can form and somebody can choose to bring yellow back in. But it's a brand new civilization at that point. There are no existing followers. Now the reverse is possible. Right now we have a large continent that red has control of, and it's possible to replace a tile such that the 1 continent becomes 2. Now in this case, we have to figure out which of the 2 sides of the continent will it go to. Okay, let's say it looks something like this, and a player placed this tile here, replacing this one. We have to figure out which part of the continent the red civilization will move to. Well, they always go to the side with the most wheat symbols. And here we do count any symbols that are on the new tile. So in this case, there's 2 wheat symbols on this side and 2 wheat symbols on this side. But a civilization will always move to a continent if it's able, because an island is not big enough to support a civilization. In this case, red would have to move to the continent and would not be allowed to move to the island. However, it can be the case where the island has more wheat symbols than the continent. So which side does the civilization move to? It moves to the island because it has more wheat symbols than the continent. But an island cannot support a civilization. So in this case, the civilization would be wiped out. And again, all players would lose the followers of the matching color. So the way to remember it is, the civilization will always move to the side that has the most wheat symbols. If it's a tie, it always moves to a continent, not an island. And if they're both continents, then the player whose turn it is gets to choose which side they move to. It can be the case that a migration can actually lead one civilization onto a continent that already has a civilization. In this case, there's a war, but you ignore the sword symbols, the migrating civ doesn't stand a chance, and it's immediately wiped out. Importantly, whenever you trigger a war or a migration, you must pay a follower. And you can pay a follower in any color. It doesn't have to be the same color. Just pay any cube back into the supply when you trigger a war or a migration. After you add your tile and then resolve any wars or migrations that might happen, then you have the option of either creating a new civilization on a so far unoccupied continent, or simply take a follower of a civilization that's already present. After that, you may pay one of your 3 scoring tokens. When you do this, you immediately score for cups. That's these symbols here. The cup symbols represent wealth, and you will score points for your cups. If these are the followers you had, and you turned in a scoring token at the end of your turn, the red civilization is worth 2 points for its 2 cups. The blue civilization is worth 1 point for its 1 cup. So you'd immediately score 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. Whenever you take points, you take them from the supply. You only have 3 of these, and one way the game can end is if all players use up all their scoring tokens. Then the game ends immediately. The game can also end when the 6th, 7th, or 8th, depending on number of players, epoch tile comes out. At the end of your turn, you draw a replacement tile so that you have a hand of 2 again. But if the tile you draw is an epoch tile, you don't put that in your hand. Instead, you set it aside so everybody can see it, and then immediately there's pyramid scoring. We look at every pyramid on the board, and the civilization that occupies the same continent as that pyramid scores 1 point. And again, the players will score points for their followers in those civilizations. But all players would do that. Scoring tokens score for cups, but only your cups for your civilizations. Only you score points, the other players don't. If they want to score points, they're going to have to play a scoring token on their turn. But the epoch scores for everybody. So in this case, the red civilization has 1 pyramid, so each red follower will score its owner 1 point. Same for the blue, because blue has 1 pyramid on its continent. This pyramid won't score for anybody because there's no civilization occupying that. And when a certain number of epoch tiles are revealed, then again, the game is over. When the game is over, each player will score cups again, just as if they had played a scoring token. They may not have any scoring tokens, that's fine. Every player scores as if they played 1 final scoring token at the end. And so they will score points for the cups, for the civilizations that they have followers in. And the player with the most points wins. That's it. You're ready to play Gheos. Gheos. I think people would have a strong opinion about this game. Good. I want more games that give people a strong opinion. Fewer games where everybody just goes, yeah, it's alright, lowest common denominator. I want a game that makes people feel passionate. Either you love this game or you hate this game. And I think that would be the case with Gheos. 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 It sort of mimics the rise and fall of civilizations. Of course, in a very abstract way. It's best, actually, to think of this more like a stock market game, where the civilizations are different companies, and you have shares in a company. If you start a company, you start with some initial shares, and you can choose to buy shares in any of the companies that are currently in play, a little bit of acquire vibes there. There's companies, or in this case civilizations, on the board, and due to gameplay, they may merge. I think a lot of people are going to look at pictures of this game and get a Carcassonne vibe from it. If you're going into this game thinking it's a game like Carcassonne, which is for the most part a very peaceful, constructive experience, a player who plays this, you're going to get a totally different vibe from this if you play this. This is a knife fight. It's a share game, but it's very in your face. You're going to have shares in the civilizations, and due to your gameplay, to the play of your tiles, civilizations can merge, fight wars, they can migrate. And these things can completely destroy a civilization. And what does that do? It tanks the value of the shares of that civilization, what the game calls followers. So you have a player who's bet heavily on white and they have a bunch of white followers. If you're able to manipulate the game such that white is completely wiped off the map, those shares are useless and the player has to get rid of them. Now that's very attacky, right? You get to target people. That player seems to be doing well and they're strong in white. Let's get white. Let's destroy white. Wipe it off the map. But you may own shares. You can choose to diversify, have a little bit in every civilization, focus heavily on one civilization that seems to be doing well, but the other players could get together and just wreck that civilization. That also makes it a really dynamic game because you have, like, over the course of the game, your holdings may change very dramatically. At the beginning, you might be strong in one color, and maybe it gets tanked. Maybe you lose all your followers in those. Then you're building up in other ones, right? You have to stay flexible. As well as an abstract game like this can, it does kind of mimic, more or less, the rise and fall of civilizations, which is kind of neat. I believe when this game originally came out, it actually got a fair bit of buzz. You have to realize that in the mid-2000s, people were clamoring for a civ-light game. And they still do, but it's a little less vocal, I feel, now than it used to be. You know, there are big, heavy civilization games. By heavy, I just mean like long, maybe complicated, you know, but especially long, take hours and hours to play. And there are people who are like, I want to get that feel of a civilization game, 60 minutes. And in that time period, in the mid-2000s, any game that came out that had even a little bit of a civ-light look or vibe to it got a huge amount of buzz. And another game was Tempest, which is a game that I will probably cover at some point. It's been requested. This sort of buzz, I just feel like a game can't meet that level of expectation. In the end, it's a very warlike Carcassonne. And look at it like that. It does sort of mimic the rise and fall of civilizations, but don't buy it as a civilization game. Oh, I have Gheos now. I no longer need to look at any other civilization games. This is all I need. No. Now, I mentioned this is a very divisive game, or at least it should be. I believe this game would really elicit some very strong reactions from people. Either they like it or they hate it. Hate it. It is very confrontational, and it is possible to just be pounded on by the other players, right? You feel like you're doing well, your civilization is quite strong, you have a lot of shares in that civilization, and the other players may cooperate to bring that civilization down a peg, you know, wipe it off the map. But you never lose victory points, right? Once you gain victory points, they're yours forever until the game is over. So it's never backward progress. You're progressing, you're gaining victory points, and you think maybe you got a good thing going, and then that's taken out from under you. And then you're going to have to make victory points some other way, aren't you? There are 3 different ways of scoring victory points. And the 3 ways are, I think, a little confusing. The game could really have used a player aid. When I think about them, they're pretty straightforward, but for some reason they're just... I do find them confusing in practice when you're trying to explain the game to a newcomer. Now, you want pyramids in epoch scoring, and you want cups when you turn in your scoring tokens, but you only got 3 of those, so when are you going to use them? So while it's confusing, once you grasp it, it does make for some really interesting challenges during the game. So for the cups, the scoring tokens, you have 3 scoring tokens you want to use them over the course of the game. You don't want to waste them. You don't want them to go unplayed, ideally, by the end of the game, because that's points you left on the table. But maybe an opportunity isn't easily obtainable to have shares in civilizations that are on continents that have lots of cup symbols. They'll have lots of wealth. But you need to work at that, right? You need to think about, I'm going to start, you can focus on one entire thing and you're doing great. And then you completely forget, oh yeah, I got these 3 scoring tokens I need to think about using. And then there's the pyramid scoring. So this is probably going to get one of the biggest complaints, I think, from people. And it is a little weird when you first encounter it. So on your turn, you're going to play a tile, you're going to draw a tile. When you draw a tile, it might be an epoch tile. And if it's an epoch tile, okay, pause, score pyramids, draw another tile. If it's another epoch tile, do it again. Theoretically, you could get a few in a row. And that feels weird to people. The most common variant I see, fan-made variant for this game, are people who find that part unsatisfying, and so they want a way to kind of space them out. I do not mind it the way it is. The way it is now, you always have to be on your toes, because that epoch scoring could come at any time. If you were to space them out so that you got one, and then you knew you wouldn't get another one for a little while, that changes the dynamic a bit. Maybe that'd be better for you, but anyway, it would change the game. And I don't mind the game the way it is in this way. It just means that every single turn, you have to be prepared for the possibility that once your turn is over, there's pyramid scoring. And so there's a constant pressure of trying to get involved in those pyramids so that when those epoch tiles come out, you're going to benefit. It's possible to try to take over a continent that has some pyramids and know you're not going to be able to hang on to it. It's too close to another continent that has a lot of swords, and another player could easily combine those continents and wipe the civilization that you're invested in that currently has these pyramids that you just took over. But you might get a benefit before the next player's turn even happens. At the end of your turn, there could be epoch scoring. At the end of your turn, there could be multiple epoch scorings. You could get a few of those tiles in a row. And you can kind of bet on that based on the odds. You see how many epoch tiles are already out. If, let's say, a couple came out early in the game, but then you haven't seen any in ages, then you're thinking like at any moment an epoch tile is going to come out. So that puts the pressure on you to, again, be involved in those pyramids. And you can take over pyramids with the knowledge that you're not going to be able to hang on to these for very long, but you might get lucky and have some epoch scoring before somebody else takes it over. The last 2-player game I played was quite funny. So there was one big long continent and it had a bunch of pyramids on one side and a bunch of swords on the other end. I kept trying to split the continent in half. I wasn't very strong in that civilization. The other player was strong in that civilization that occupied that continent. So I was trying to split it in half. That civilization would migrate to the other end, away from the pyramids, because that had the most wheat. And then I would start a new civilization on this side, where the pyramids were. Well, that end also had lots of swords, so it was very easy for the player, the other player, on their next turn, to simply combine them again. And then there would be a war, and their swords for their civilization would wipe out the one I just created and take those pyramids back. But I'm hoping that in that small period of time, before they take it back, I'm able to get some pyramid scoring. And this was back and forth like that for a while, until I was able to split the continent with a tile that had a pyramid on it, because you can't replace those. You can't build over them. And so then they weren't able to immediately merge them. And so that was kind of a fun back and forth. Now, not everybody's going to be a fan of that kind of back and forth style. The 2-player is very, very aggressive, very in your face, back and forth, just fighting tooth and nail. And 4-player, you do score when it's not your turn with the epoch scoring, but the other ways of scoring, which are temples and cups with your scoring tokens, you only score on your turn. So, it's one of those games where, the board will change a fair bit by the time your turn comes around. And the board can change a lot. I think this game could easily suffer from analysis paralysis too, because, first of all, you have a hand of 2 tiles. Not only can you orient each tile however you like, Not only can you build all along the edges, but you can also replace tiles that are in the middle. You can build over almost any tile on the map. So of your 2 tiles, each tile has a huge number of options. So be aware if you're with any people, you play with any people who suffer from analysis paralysis, this could get to them a little bit. Those scoring tokens are interesting because you have 3 that you have to use up over the course of the game, or you want to use up over the course of the game. Otherwise, you're not scoring points for them. But the game ends when they're all used up. So, especially in a 2-player game, you don't want to play your last scoring token too early. Or even maybe at all. Because once you do, the other player who still has at least 1 scoring token left has a lot of control over when the game ends. Unless the game ends from epoch tiles, it will end when they play their last scoring token, and so they can choose when to end it. And that's a big deal because at the end of the game, each player, again, scores as if they just played a scoring token. So that player will actually get a double score, right? So, they're fighting to make the board look a certain way, and they play your last scoring token, score a bunch of points, end of the game, guess what? Score again. I could understand some people thinking that's a bad thing, but as long as you know about it, it's part of the strategy. You can plan around it. It's definitely more noticeable in a 2-player game. So, of all the player counts, I prefer this 3-player for sure. It definitely works 2-player, but it is a battle, no question. And for 4-player, yeah, it still works fine. I think it's important to make sure that everybody's on the same page going in. Make sure they understand the scoring tokens, the different ways of scoring. Make sure they understand what kind of game it is. That it's going to be aggressive. Maybe even mention the whole shares thing. Describe the followers, the cubes, as shares of a company in a civilization. And that might actually create a bit more of a connection in their brain as to how to treat the game. Because what happens is when you create a civilization and you get followers in that, there is a temptation to feel like that civilization is yours. And then when that civilization gets tanked, you almost feel hurt personally because you were attacked. But no, you don't own that civilization no more than you own that company. You just own shares in the company. I like the fact that when you initiate a war or a migration, you have to spend a cube, spend a follower. If you are very heavily invested in a single civilization and you have only cubes of that civilization, but that civilization's doing pretty well, you won't want any wars or migrations because you're giving up those cubes and other players may get them. It gives you an advantage if you diversify because you have a bunch of different colors, and on your turn, when you're initiating a war or a migration, already presumably to your benefit, you turn in a cube, but you can turn in any color you want. So it's very common, for example, if you're strong in blue and I have, a bunch of different colors including blue, and I see a way to tank blue by initiating a war or migration, I do it. I pay the blue cube. It's about to be worthless anyway. Then the blue civilization gets wiped off the map, and you with your blue cubes curse at me, and you might say bad words to me, you might insult me, but in my head I hear, good move, Daryl. The problems people have with this game are not unfair, but they don't bother me personally. And while it's not a game that I would necessarily recommend to everybody, if you are the type of player who likes games like Acquire and Tigris and Euphrates, Shark maybe, another game that's been requested, if you like that style of game and you want to find more games of that type, this is a good one. This is a game that I enjoy, and I don't think I would ever really probably turn down a game of this, especially 3-player, which is my preferred way to play. But not all those games are going to appeal to everybody, and there are going to be some people who would just prefer to play those games, and that's completely fair too. If you like that style of game and you're looking for more games of that type just for variety, while it may appeal to fans of those games, Gheos is a game all on its own, and it's a unique game with the triangular tiles and the fact that you can build over or replace tiles. There's no other game quite like it, and it's not going to be for everybody, but it might be for you. Thanks for watching. Remember, Older games like Gheos don't stop being good just because newer games come out. Take care.